Is your camera lying to you? Hello, I am Professor of Knowledge, Jacob Fredrickson, and I'm here today to teach you everything you need to know, which is to say, everything I know about lenses. A lens is a tube, sometimes plastic, sometimes metal, itself filled with curved pieces of glass, themselves called lenses. The purpose of a lens is to take the world, which is very big, and compress it into a tiny square, which in this case is where the film would be, but in your case, that tiny square is digital, and that digital film square is called the sensor. Now, camera lenses accomplish this magnificent feat of compressing the world into a size that a sensor can handle by a specific order of convex and concave lenses all stacked up next to each other. But there is a point where these lenses stop, and then there's a little gap of space, and then the sensor. And that gap, we have an illustration here, is the focal distance. The distance between the last glass element and your sensor. And that distance, the focal distance, is measured in millimeters, as all things should be. And that's what those little numbers are, 18, 24, 55 millimeters. Now, focal lengths actually make a lot more sense than apertures because smaller numbers means that the glass is closer to your sensor, right? And it is more zoomed out. Actually, it doesn't make any more sense. While I can't explain why this happens because I am a professor of knowledge and not a scientist, a smaller focal length number will give you a more zoomed out or wider image. There are three main terms you'll encounter when talking about lenses: wide, standard, and telephoto. All of these refer to your field of view, which is to say, the things that you can see. Wide means that you can see a lot. Standard means that you can see a quote-unquote standard amount, which is to say a regular amount. And telephoto is great if you're trying to take pictures like this, or pictures of faraway stuff. It works pretty good for faraway stuff. But why would you use anything other than wide? I mean, it's got everything in the frame, right? This is your standard 91.5 centimeter piece of wood. It's a yardstick. And it's completely straight. But if we put it down, you'll notice it curving. This is what wide-angle lenses do. Right there. I haven't tilted it at all, and now, look, right here in the corner. Whee! Curve. But you might think, oh, as long as I'm not shooting yardsticks, this isn't a problem. Let me tell you something. You also get this problem with buildings and people's faces. As wide as your camera will go is not the best choice all the time. Sometimes you might want to go standard, or actually most of the time you might want to go standard, but when you're standard, you can't catch everything. I mean, you barely have my face, and I'm, pretty far away at this point. But you may be asking, okay, you've got a wide angle, you've got a standard. Why would you ever want a zoom lens? Well, let me tell you, Buster. Most of the time, you probably won't, especially if you take a lot of self-portraits. But not having a zoom lens and needing one is way worse than having a zoom lens and not needing it. Point of order here. When I say zoom, I'm not talking about the zoom lens that came with your camera. That is a wide-angle zoom. What I'm talking about is this thing, which is a 55 to 250 telephoto lens. That's another thing you'll hear. Telephoto means beyond standard into super close-up. I just call it a zoom. Even though photography nerds will correct you and they'll tell you that this is a zoom also. But what about lenses that don't zoom? Do they have a special name? Yes, primes. That's basically all you need to know. One of the coolest things about zooms is that they make you look closer to the background than you really are. That tree, if you can even see it, is about 3 meters behind me. Another thing they do is that they're really good for portraits. You don't get any of that distortion you would like with a wide angle. Unfortunately, This is a really hard effect to achieve if you're doing something on your own. So I wouldn't suggest it for self-portraits. A little bit of purchasing advice for those of you out there, and this isn't a regular feature of this series, but please do not buy the Canon EFS 55-250. If you zoom in, nothing looks good. You can see the thing, but it's like it's out of focus, no matter how carefully you focus. It's ridiculous. It's a piece of garbage. Do not buy. That said, having a zoom lens is definitely better than not having a zoom lens. I would just choose a different one. Like, literally any other one. Okay, now that we've got a definition of terms and an unexpected buying advice thing out of the way, let's get down to the lead story. Is your camera lying to you? Well, sort of, but it's nothing to worry about. Film cameras had a sensor size of 35mm diagonally. Why is this important? Because the width of all lenses is based off of that one 35mm sensor, which in that case was actually a piece of film. And the most expensive cameras still have a 35mm sensor, but it's not that important anymore, frankly. Why am I even mentioning it? Let's go to the diagram. This circle is what your lens projects into the back of your camera, which makes sense because your lens is round. The big rectangle is a 35mm sensor. As you can see, it captures a lot more of it. And the smaller rectangle is what my camera has, a crop sensor. Yeah, I know, it sounds bad, doesn't it? But it isn't, really. Crop sensors, the only difference is that what you see is 1.5 times less wide than a 35mm fancy or film camera would see. For example, on my camera, I have the lens set to 18, which is as wide as I can go. But to get this exact shot on a fancy or film camera, I would have to set the lens to 27, which is 1.5 times 18. I know, math. Sorry. EF versus EFS. They make special lenses for crop sensor cameras, and on Canon they're called EFS. The deal is they're a lot cheaper and they only fit on crop sensor cameras. Now, cheaper can be great, but in the case of the EFS 55-250, it is most decidedly not. But this zoom lens that came with my camera is pretty nice. I mean, it's EFS. But the thing about EFS is that they won't fit on a fancier camera. I mean, they'll fit on another crop sensor camera, but if you decide to go pro all of a sudden one day, well, you're gonna have to buy a bunch of new lenses, which, you know, I mean, you're buying a fancy camera. Maybe you don't want to spend all that money on lenses? Now, you would think that these special EFS lenses would have their numbers adjusted so that they display their true field of view in a 35mm sense. Does that make sense? Yeah. But no. 18mm is still 18mm from the sensor, after all. It's just that the sensor is smaller than it can possibly be. Therefore, when I adjust my camera here to 35mm, this is what a film or very fancy camera would see when you're at 50. But when I adjust my built-in lens to 50, this is closer to what they would see at like 80-something. So when you're reading photoblogs or listening to photographers on the radio or whatever, and they're talking about lenses and they're like, oh, I like this one so much, and you have a crop sensor camera like I do, divide whatever number they said was the best by 1.5. Okay? That way it'll look the same on your camera. Yes. Well, I guess that's the end of things I know about lenses. Come back next time when we're going to edit a picture. Woohoo!